The year was 2041, and humanity had just done something it had been dreaming about for centuries. It finally said hello to someone from another world. Nobody really knew how to act. Governments were nervous. Scientists were losing their minds in the best way possible. And the military had about 40 different contingency plans depending on whether the aliens showed up friendly, angry, or somewhere in between. They showed up curious. Jake Cole was 26 years old, working as a junior interpreter for the United Nations. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the big moment. He was the guy who translated background documents and made sure nothing got lost between languages. Boring work, but steady. His boss, a stiff older man named Roy, had picked him for the posting almost by accident. The original guy got food poisoning 2 days before launch, so Jake ended up on orbital platform Meridian, floating somewhere between Earth and the Moon, surrounded by diplomats in expensive suits and soldiers pretending to look relaxed. He expected 3 weeks of paperwork and stale cafeteria food. He got Lyra instead. She was Valkyrie. That meant silver skin tall, like really tall, almost a foot taller than Jake, and eyes that were this pale, washed-out silver color that made it hard to tell exactly where she was looking. The Valkyrie delegation had about 12 members, all of them serious and formal. Lyra was the daughter of one of the senior envoys, and she was supposed to stay quiet in the background. She did not do that. From the very first day, she kept showing up wherever Jake was, not in a scary way. More like a kid who just found out the zoo has a new animal and can't stop going back to look at it. Except Jake was the animal. She asked him why humans put pictures of strangers on their walls. She asked why the cafeteria served food that smelled good but tasted like nothing. She picked up his coffee cup one morning, sniffed it, and looked at him like he had personally offended her. "This smells burned," she said. "Why do you drink it?" "Because without it I can't function before 9 a.m., Jake said. She stared at him for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if he was joking. He wasn't. She started showing up at breakfast every day after that just to watch him drink it. She never touched the stuff herself, but she was fascinated that humans had built an entire culture around a bitter bean that made them feel slightly less terrible in the mornings. Jake started saving her a chair without really thinking about it. They talked about a lot of things. She was genuinely smart, the kind of smart that made you nervous, like she was quietly filing away everything you said. But she wasn't cold about it. She laughed at things, not the same way humans laugh, more like a soft exhale through the nose. But it counted. 3 weeks went fast. On the last night before the Valkyrie ship was scheduled to leave, the whole platform had this strange quiet to it, like everyone knew something was ending. Jake found Lyra standing by the observation window, looking down at Earth like she was trying to memorize it. He stood next to her. Didn't say anything for a while. Then, because he was tired and a little sad and never knew when to keep his mouth shut, he smiled and said, "Come back in 10 years. Maybe I'll marry you by then." He meant it as a joke. The kind of thing you say when you don't know how to say goodbye properly. Lyra turned and looked at him, those pale silver eyes, steady and unreadable. She didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She just looked at him for a long moment, like she was weighing something heavy. Then she turned back to window. Her ship left at dawn. Jake stood on the platform and watched it go until it disappeared into the black. And then he went back inside and poured himself another terrible cup of coffee. Nobody becomes a legend overnight. Most of the time it happens quietly, one small thing at a time, until one day people just start treating you differently and you're not sure exactly when that started. That's how it went for Jake. After the summit on Meridian, he came back to Earth with a head full of Valkyrie vocabulary and a reputation for being the only interpreter who hadn't frozen up when an alien walked into the room. Roy put him on the next alien language project immediately, then the one after that. Then they stopped asking and just assumed he'd handle it. Within 3 years, Jake Cole was one of the most trusted xenolinguists the UN had. Not the loudest, not the most decorated. Just the one who showed up, did the work, and never made things worse. There's a certain kind of person like that in every field. The one who never grabs headlines, but is always in a room when something actually matters. He brokered 2 trade agreements with species humanity had only known about for 18 months each. He sat in on a tense 3-day meeting near the Jupiter border, where 2 factions were about 40 minutes from a serious incident, and he talked both sides down by finding the one phrase in their shared dialect that meant roughly the same thing as, let's be reasonable. Nobody wrote a news story about it. He was fine with that. His colleague Dave, who worked in the office next to his and ate lunch with him almost every day, thought Jake was quietly the most impressive person he'd ever met and showed this by making fun of him constantly. You talked down an interstellar border dispute, Dave said one afternoon, dropping into the chair across from Jake's desk. And then you came home and ate a sandwich alone in your apartment. That's your life. It was a good sandwich, Jake said. You need to get out more. Jake's sister Amy agreed, though she showed it differently. She had been setting him up on dates since he turned 28, each one carefully selected. Each one canceled by Jake within 48 hours of confirming it. He always had a reason. Work ran late. A translation project came in. One time he genuinely forgot, which he felt bad about, but not bad enough to reschedule. Amy sat him down after the fourth cancellation and looked at him the way only older sisters can, like they're seeing something you've successfully hidden from everyone else. Who is she? Amy asked. There's nobody, Jake said. Amy didn't believe him. She let it go anyway. The truth was more complicated and also simpler than he wanted to admit. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He wasn't carrying a torch or holding on to some impossible hope. He just never met anyone who made the world feel more interesting than the work did. And the work was genuinely interesting. That's what he told himself. Then the Valkyrie went quiet. Not hostile, not distant in a cold way. Just gone. Their communication channels stayed open, but nothing came through them. Their ships stopped appearing near the outer stations. For a few months, the diplomatic community held its breath, waiting for something bad. Nothing came. Just silence. 1 year passed. Then 2. Then 4. Jake wrote reports about it, flagged it in 3 separate briefings. Everyone acknowledged it was unusual, and then moved on to more immediate problems. Because Earth always had more immediate problems. By year 5, most people had stopped thinking about the Valkyrie altogether. Jake still thought about them. He told himself it was professional interest, unresolved diplomatic loose ends. The kind of thing that bothers you when you care about your work. He poured his morning coffee, looked out the window, and almost believed it. The alert came in at 2:47 in the morning. Jake was asleep in his apartment, which was the first real sleep he'd gotten in about 4 days, which meant he was deeply, completely unconscious when his comm unit started screaming at him from a nightstand. He knocked it onto the floor. It kept screaming. He picked it up, saw Roy's name on the screen, and was already sitting up before his brain had fully caught up with what was happening. Get to the platform, Roy said. No greeting. No explanation. Now. The transport was already waiting outside his building. Nobody told him anything on the way up. The 2 soldiers who escorted him looked tense, in that specific way soldiers look when they've been given orders they don't fully understand yet. Jake sat in the back of the transport and watched Earth shrink beneath him and tried to guess what kind of situation waited at the other end. He figured out it was bad when he saw the defense grid. Orbital Platform Meridian had a threat response system that ran on 4 levels. Green was normal. Blue was elevated monitoring. Yellow, amber, technically, meant something had shown up that nobody had a clean answer for. In 12 years of working with the platform, Jake had never seen it go above blue. It was amber when he arrived. The comm deck was packed. Military officers standing in clusters, talking low and fast. Analysts pulling data on screens that Jake didn't have clearance to read. And Roy, standing at the center of all of it, still in his dress uniform from whatever dinner he'd been pulled away from, a dark sweat stain already forming between his shoulder blades. Roy saw Jake and crossed the room in about 4 steps. Valkyrie vessel, Roy said. Dropped out of FDL 40 minutes ago. Mars proximity. No advance notice. No hailing frequency. No explanation. Just appeared. Jake felt something shift in his chest. How big? Twice the size of anything they've ever sent. Maybe 3 times. Roy lowered his voice. They're not responding to standard hails. But they sent one message about 20 minutes ago. Came in clean, no interference, no distortion. 7 words. He handed Jake a printed transcript. Send Jake Cole. We will speak to him. Jake read it twice. Then he folded the paper and put it in his pocket because he didn't know what else to do with it. "All right," he said. They put him in front of the main comm panel, gave him a headset, cleared everyone back about 3 feet, like that would somehow help if things went wrong. Jake sat down, adjusted the mic, and took one slow breath. He opened the channel. The screen flickered, static for half a second, and then it cleared, and there she was. Jake had spent 7 years not thinking about her, which meant he'd spent 7 years thinking about her more than he wanted to admit. But whatever version of Lyra he'd been carrying around in the back of his head, that curious, silver-eyed girl who sniffed his coffee and watched Earth from the observation window, that version was gone. The woman on the screen was older, not in a harsh way, but in the way that people look when they've been carrying real responsibility for a long time. She wore black and silver command armor, fitted and clean, with rank markings running along her jaw like a map of everything she'd earned since he last saw her. Her posture was straight, her expression was steady, but her eyes were exactly the same. Pale silver, quiet, watching him the same way they always had, like she was weighing something only she could see. "Jake Cole," she said. Her voice was calm and even. "I am here to discuss terms." Jake opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You look well," he said. Behind him, Roy made a sound like a man trying not to have a heart attack quietly. And Lyra, commander, senior envoy, whatever she was now, almost smiled. Roy cleared the room within 2 minutes. Whatever instinct had kept him alive through 30 years of military service told him that what was about to happen needed fewer people in it, not more. He pulled the analysts out, waved off the officers, and left Jake sitting alone in front of the screen with a cold cup of coffee and an alien commander who had just parked a ship the size of a small city outside Mars. Jake appreciated that about Roy. The man knew when to get out of the way. Lyra waited until the room was empty. Then she leaned forward slightly, and something in her posture changed. Not softer exactly, but less formal, like she'd been holding a specific shape for a long time, and finally allowed herself to breathe. "There's a faction," she said, "within the High Council. They have been planning something for 3 years. Jake didn't interrupt. One of the first things you learn as an interpreter is that the most important information almost never comes in the first sentence. You wait, you listen, you let people find their way to the thing they actually came to say. What Lyra came to say was serious. A group inside the Velcari government had spent the last 3 years quietly building a case against humanity, not based on anything humans had actually done, but on what they might do. Earth was expanding fast. New stations near the outer planets. Trade routes pushing further into space every year. To most of the galaxy, that looked like a species finding its feet. To this faction, it looked like a threat that needed to be dealt with early. Their plan was clean and careful. Stage an incident. Something that looked like human aggression. Something that could be documented and presented to the wider galactic community as proof that Earth needed to be pushed back. Contained. Kept behind an agreed boundary line near Mars. Far from the deeper trade routes, far from any real influence. It was the kind of plan that works when nobody finds out about it beforehand. Lyra had found out about it. She pulled up the files as she talked. Star maps with routes marked in detail. Intercepted internal orders written in a dialect so old that Jake almost missed the meaning of 2 key phrases and had to ask her to slow down. Dates, coordinates, the names of the officials who had signed off on it. Jake sat very still and read everything she sent across. His hands were steady. His face was calm. Inside, he was doing the thing he always did when something genuinely scared him, which was focus harder on the details, so there was no room left for fear. When she finished, he looked up from the documents. "You defied your counsel to bring this here," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes." "That's not a small thing." "No," she said. "It is not." He looked at her for a moment, outside the window behind her, through whatever camera fed her image to his screen. He could see the faint curve of her ship's hull against the dark. "Why?" he asked. "You could have sent this through a back channel, an anonymous source. You didn't have to come yourself." Lyra was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Jake thought she might not answer at all. Then she said, 10 years ago, a human made me a joke. I spent 10 years deciding if he meant it. She said it simply, No drama in her voice. Just the plain truth of it. Laid out like something she'd been carrying for a long time and had finally decided to set down. Jake looked at her. Really looked at her. The armor. The rank marks. The eyes that hadn't changed at all. He didn't laugh this time. The Security Council session lasted 11 hours. Jake had sat through long meetings before. Diplomatic negotiations that dragged on for days. Translation sessions where every single word had to be weighed 3 times before anyone would agree to move to the next sentence. He was used to rooms full of people who moved slowly because the stakes were high and nobody wanted to be the one who got it wrong. But this one was different because this time he wasn't just interpreting. He was standing at the front of the room, next to Lyra, presenting evidence that could have started a war if it had gone the other way. Lyra was calm through the whole thing, answered every question directly, pulled up every document when they asked for it. When one of the senior council members pushed back and suggested the evidence might be fabricated, she looked at him for a long, quiet moment and then walked him through the file authentication so slowly and so thoroughly that he stopped talking and didn't start again for the rest of the session. Jake translated. He kept his voice even and his face neutral the way he'd trained himself to do. But somewhere around hour 7, when he could feel the room finally starting to shift, when he could tell that the doubt was giving way and the council was beginning to understand the full weight of what they were looking at, he let himself feel it, just for a second, the quiet, enormous relief of disaster that didn't happen. The faction inside the Velcari Council lost everything inside of 4 days. Their plan, their credibility, their political ground. When the wider galactic community saw the evidence that Lyra had brought, the response was fast, and it was not kind. Nobody likes finding out they were almost used as a prop in someone else's power move. A new joint charter between Earth and the Velcari was drafted within the week. Better terms than anything humanity had managed to negotiate before. Real terms. The kind that actually meant something. Roy shook Jake's hand afterward and said, "Good work," in the tone he used when he actually meant it, which was rare enough that Jake remembered it. The reception was small. Just staff, a handful of diplomats, and the kind of coffee that comes from a machine in the corner that nobody has cleaned properly in 6 months. Jake was standing near the window with a cup of it, doing nothing, which was something he hadn't done in about 9 days. Dave appeared at his elbow. "So," Dave said, in the voice he used when he was about to say something he'd been holding for a while, "what actually made them trust us? Like, genuinely. Because the official version makes it sound very smooth and diplomatic. And I know you, so I know it wasn't that simple." Jake looked across the room. Lyra was standing near one of the side tables, looking down at a data pad with great concentration. She was pretending to read it. He could tell, because she hadn't turned the page in 10 minutes. "Honestly," Jake said, "a terrible joke I made 10 years ago." Dave stared at him. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." Across the room, Lyra looked up, just for a second, like she'd somehow heard him through the noise of the room. She met his eyes. Then she set the data pad down on the table, slowly, deliberately, and walked over. She stopped in front of him, looked at him the same way she always had, like she was weighing something that only she could measure. "It was not terrible," she said quietly. Jake smiled. "A little bit terrible." "No." Dave looked between the two of them, opened his mouth, closed it, and very wisely walked away. And then Lyra did something that no Velcari had ever done in front of a room full of humans before. She reached out and took Jake's hand, not as a formal gesture, not as part of any protocol or diplomatic tradition. There was no ceremony to it, no announcement, no significance assigned to it by anyone in any official capacity. She just took his hand because she wanted to. Jake didn't say anything. He just stood there by the window, bad coffee in one hand, Lyra's fingers wrapped around the other, looking out at the stars that humanity had spent centuries dreaming about reaching. They were still out there, endless and wide open. And somehow, against all reasonable odds, Earth had made a friend in them.